The air in Boca Chica tasted like salt and iron that night, the kind of taste that clings to your lips long after the wind has passed. Elon Musk walked alone near the dim edges of the SpaceX compound, hands tucked into the pockets of a well-worn jacket, his eyes scanning the stars overhead like a man searching for punctuation in a vast, unfinished sentence. His nights were usually filled with spreadsheets, simulations, or silence, but tonight something felt off. Or maybe too quiet. That's when he heard it. A voice. Not just any voice, but one that sliced through the air with a strange rhythm, erratic yet oddly precise. It echoed off the aluminum walls and scattered desert stones, like a broken equation looking for its equal sign. Elliptical delta, subsonic resonance breached at terminal decay, the voice chanted. Elon stopped, turned. At first, he thought it might be a prank. Some overenthusiastic intern playing a joke. Or worse, a journalist with a voice recorder and no shame. But then he saw him. A man barefoot, hunched beneath a flickering street lamp near the chain-link fence. His skin was sunburned, his beard tangled, and his clothes were a chaotic mosaic of found fabric and oil stains. His eyes were somewhere else, not focused on Elon or even the road, but gazing upward toward the kind of stars you couldn't see unless you believed in them. And he was still talking. Exhaust velocity surpasses standard oxidizer resistance. Slingshot window closed 12 seconds too late. Should have corrected pre-ignition dampening. Should have. Elon took a slow step closer. Something about the man's cadence scratched at the back of his brain. He knew this language. Not just English, but the other language, the one built from failure reports, propulsion logs, half-written equations on whiteboards at 3 a.m. "Hey," Elon called softly. The man didn't flinch. He simply shifted his weight from one foot to the other, still looking at the stars. "They built it wrong," he murmured. And they knew. They always know. Elon's brow furrowed. What was built wrong? "The turbine wasn't supposed to whine like that," the man replied, voice quieter now. It was a cry. The metal cried. But they didn't listen. And when the vacuum seal failed, they blamed the equations. Blamed me. Elon stepped closer. "What's your name?" "Doesn't matter," the man said, blinking. "I used to have one, before the stars stopped speaking." "Do the stars speak now?" The man looked at him, really looked. For the first time, their eyes met. And Elon saw something behind those cracked pupils that unsettled him, a flicker of memory. Familiarity. Recognition. "They whisper sometimes," the man said, "especially when the wind comes from the east." Elon glanced to his left. The wind was coming from the east. "You know," the man added, "if you align the spin vectors at launch with gravitational dip harmonics, the delay at stage separation drops by 0.0034 seconds. You'd save 2 million in fuel and possibly stop killing birds." Elon's mouth parted. That wasn't just rambling. That was insight. Real, measurable, and damn it correct. He crouched slowly, meeting the man at eye level. "How do you know that?" The man smirked, eyes dancing somewhere between mania and brilliance. "Because I wrote that vector matrix 10 years ago. Then they took my badge, erased my logins, and told me to go rest somewhere quiet. So I did." A dozen responses fought for space in Elon's throat. None made it out. His brain moved too quickly for his voice to catch up. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a protein bar, one of the ones he forgot he carried. "Here," he offered. The man took it without hesitation, but didn't eat it. He turned it over in his hands like it was a tool, inspecting its wrapper. "Almond. Good. Not too sweet. Not like the boosters. They made those sweet so the contractors would stop asking questions." Elon almost laughed. Almost. He sat beside the man on the curb, brushing dust from the edge of his jeans. Silence settled between them for a few moments, punctuated only by the gentle rustle of the wind and the distant clink of metal from inside the rocket yard. Then, almost casually, the man said, "You're Elon Musk, aren't you?" Elon blinked. "Yeah." "You're the guy who built a rocket and launched a car because you got bored." "Among other things." The man chuckled dryly. They think I'm crazy, but I know what escape velocity feels like. Another pause. Elon leaned in, lowering his voice. Where did you work? The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a piece of broken chalk from his pocket, where had that come from, and began drawing on the concrete. Curved lines, trajectory arcs, intersecting ellipses. NASA, the man whispered. Then I went off books. Subdivision 31. Prototype work. They called it Prometheus. Elon froze. The name hit like a lightning strike to his chest. Prometheus wasn't public, not even internally discussed anymore. The project had been abandoned, scrubbed, buried in NDAs and security clearances, so thick they may as well have been buried on the moon. No one was supposed to know about it. No one, except the man capped his drawing with a final scribble, a strange figure 8 with a diagonal slash. Elon knew it. It was a deprecated schematic for a failed propulsion concept they'd briefly tested in-house before discarding it. Only 3 people ever even saw the draft, and one of them was dead. Elon rose to his feet slowly. What's your name? He asked again, firmer this time. The man looked up at him, face calm, eyes sharp. Used to be Mike, he said. Now, just a ghost with a chalkboard. Then he smiled, small and strange, and added one last line. But you should really fix that 3rd stage injector before someone else doesn't come back. Elon stared at him, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel like the smartest man in the room. The morning came early in Boca Chica, not because the sun rose any faster here, but because light always found a way to touch the dust before it warmed the sky. Elon returned to the spot near the perimeter fence just after sunrise, carrying 2 paper cups of coffee from the employee canteen. One black, one loaded with sugar and creamer, because he wasn't sure which type of man he'd be dealing with. Mike was still there, or at least the same shape of a man who'd once been called Mike. He was curled on his side, using a rolled-up hoodie as a pillow and a plastic tarp as a makeshift blanket. The chalk drawing from the night before the figure 8, the trajectory curves, was half erased by the wind. Elon paused, watching how the man's chest rose and fell in a slow rhythm, like a wave that hadn't yet decided whether to crash or retreat. He cleared his throat softly. Coffee. The figure stirred. A groggy grunt emerged. Then, with an odd grace, Mike sat up, blinking like someone waking from a 1,000-year nap. Is it poisoned? He asked deadpan. Only with capitalism, Elon replied. Mike cracked a smile. I'll take the sweet one then. They sat on the curb again, shoulder to shoulder but not touching, staring out at the open road. A pair of birds squawked in the distance, chasing something invisible in the sky. I thought you wouldn't come back, Mike said, sipping the coffee like it was sacrament. I almost didn't, Elon admitted. But then I realized I couldn't stop thinking about what you said. About the vector harmonics. And Prometheus. Mike's eyes flicked toward him, not fully, just a side glance, the kind you use when deciding whether to trust someone with the truth or the version of it you can survive repeating. That project wasn't supposed to exist, he said. Not publicly. It didn't, Elon replied. And yet here you are. Mike chuckled and stared into his cup. Funny thing about secrets. They always find someone with nothing to lose to carry them. Elon turned slightly toward him. Do you remember your full name? Mike shrugged. Depends who's asking. The government called me Subject 9031F. NASA had me down as Michael A. Smith. But I think my mom used to call me Mick. Not sure. Might have been the neighbor's dog. Do you know how old you are? I stopped counting after the 3rd failed propulsion test. Time gets slippery after that. There was a pause. Elon let the silence breathe between them. Finally, Mike said more quietly, I'm probably 50-something, but I feel like I've lived 3 different lives and none of them were mine. That hit harder than expected. Elon studied the man's face, the lines etched not just by time, but by something deeper. Grief? Betrayal? Isolation? Whatever it was, it hadn't dulled his mind. If anything, it had sharpened it to a blade so fine you could cut through equations with it. You're not just reciting jargon, Elon said. You understand what you're saying. You feel it. Mike didn't deny it. I dream in diagrams, he whispered. I used to think that was a gift. Now I think it's a trap. There was a poetry in the way he spoke. A strange, lyrical weight that made his words sound like they'd been carved from old mission logs and forgotten black boxes. You talk like an engineer, Elon said, but also like a philosopher. Mike shrugged again. Rocket science and existential dread aren't that different. Both are about escaping gravity. That made Elon laugh. A real one this time. Sharp, sudden, and involuntary. So, he said after a moment, what happened to you? Mike's smile faded. His gaze dropped to his feet. They told me I wasn't stable. Said my mental state was a liability. But what do you expect when you're testing propulsion systems designed to break boundaries of physics, of atmosphere, of morality? We were building things no one understood. I started asking questions, the kind they didn't like. Then they stopped returning my calls. Security escorted me out. I woke up on a bus bench 2 days later with no ID and a warning scratched into my palm. He held out his hand. The scar was faint, almost gone. But Elon could make out what looked like an etched word, forget. He exhaled, slow and deliberate. Who did this? Mike stared into the distance, like the answer was hiding in the dunes. Someone who wanted to keep the past buried. Someone who thinks ideas should be owned, not shared. Elon sipped his coffee, cold now. Well, he said, standing, I disagree. Mike looked up at him. You don't even know if I'm real. I know enough, Elon said. And I know you're not crazy. Or at least, not in the way that disqualifies genius. Mike squinted. So what happens now? Elon extended a hand. You come with me. No strings. No cameras. Just help me understand what you know. Mike hesitated. His eyes narrowed like someone squinting into the sun after years in darkness. Why would you help me? He asked. Elon smiled, faint but sincere. Because I've spent my whole life building things to go up. And I think maybe it's time I help someone else rise for a change. Mike studied the hand. For a second, he looked like he might cry. But instead, he reached out, slow and steady, and gripped it. And just like that, something shifted, not in the world, but in space between two men who should never have met. They walked toward the gate, side by side. Sometimes the people society overlooks are the ones holding the answers we've been searching for. If you're finding this story as intriguing as we are, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and join us for the next chapter. Trust me, you don't want to miss what comes next. The conference room smelled faintly of printer toner and ambition. It was a sterile contrast to the grid of the roadside where just hours ago Elon had been trading cosmic philosophy with a man society had forgotten. Now he stood in front of a whiteboard filled with scribbled equations, not his own, but borrowed from memory. Mike's memory. A handful of top engineers leaned forward around the long glass table, most still rubbing sleep from their eyes or sipping burnt coffee. Elon had woken them up early. That was nothing new. What was new was the look in his eyes, something between curiosity and urgency. It meant he was either about to fire someone or invent something dangerous. Possibly both. So Elon began, pointing with a marker to the looping variable set at the top of the board. Tell me what's wrong with this. Amir, one of the propulsion specialists, furrowed his brow. It's efficient. Almost too efficient. These compression values don't match anything from our archives. They don't, Elon agreed, because they're not from our archives. A man recited them to me from memory last night, while sitting barefoot on a curb. The room went still. You're serious? Whispered Lauren, a systems engineer with 3 PhDs and a reputation for zero nonsense. Elon nodded. Dead serious. He also proposed a modification to our oxidizer distribution array that could reduce burn rate by 4.8% without changing the fuel composition. A beat. Who is he? Asked Amir. Elon paused. That's the thing. He says his name is Mike Smith. Doesn't know if that's real. But based on everything he said, he's not just repeating formulas. He's thinking them. The engineers exchanged skeptical glances, but Elon's tone left no room for debate. "Double-check these equations," he said, handing Lauren a printed sheet with Mike's notes. "And make sure we're not reinventing something he already lived through." Then, before anyone could ask more, Elon was gone. Back at the same dusty stretch of roadside, Mike sat cross-legged beside the chain-link fence, carving something into a piece of cardboard with a chunk of blackened charcoal. The sun glared off the concrete. A warm wind played with his hair, as if trying to read over his shoulder. Elon approached quietly this time. No coffee, no speeches, just a quiet respect for the space around genius. Mike didn't look up. "Back again, huh? You make it sound like I'm interrupting something sacred." "You are," Mike muttered, smudging the charcoal line with his palm. "But I'll allow it. You brought clarity with the caffeine yesterday. What's today's offering?" Elon crouched beside him, squinting at the cardboard. What he saw startled him, a crude but unmistakably accurate sketch of a closed-cycle engine, complete with annotations, thrust differentials, and a new nozzle shape Elon didn't recognize. "You made this from memory?" Elon asked. Mike shrugged. "Memory's a slippery word. Sometimes it feels more like static. But yeah, it came back to me last night. In pieces." Elon sat beside him, folding his arms. "I showed your equations to my team. They're not just impressed, they're confused. Some of what you said shouldn't work, and yet mathematically it does." Mike blinked. "Then maybe the rules are wrong, or maybe we've been too afraid to test them." There was no arrogance in his tone, just conviction, the kind that comes from seeing too much and being believed too little. "I want to show you something," Elon said carefully. "Inside the SpaceX compound." Mike froze. Elon saw the tension ripple through him like a nerve ending touched by cold water. "No suits," Elon added quickly. "No press. Just me. A walkthrough. You can leave whenever you want." Mike stared at the cardboard, his finger tracing the edge like it might become a blade. "Why?" "Because I think you might know things we forgot, or things we were never taught. And I want to know if there's more where this came from." Mike's eyes flicked up. "You think I'm some fallen oracle, a prophet in ripped jeans?" "No," Elon said. "I think you're a brilliant mind that someone tried very hard to erase. And I don't like erasers." Mike sat with it, let the silence grow roots. Then he said, without looking at Elon, "What if I don't like what I see in there? What if it brings things back I spent years trying to forget?" "Then we walk out together," Elon promised. "And you never owe me a thing." Another pause. The cardboard fluttered slightly in the breeze. Finally, Mike folded it in half, the drawing hidden now, and stood slowly, creaking like an old bridge returning to use. "Okay," he said, "but I'm not putting on a lab coat." "I wouldn't ask you to." The walk from the curb to the security gate was surreal. Mike moved with cautious steps, like a man crossing a river of glass. The guard at the gate raised an eyebrow but said nothing when Elon gave a short nod. The scanner beeped. The gate opened. For a brief second, Mike flinched at the hiss of hydraulics, muscle memory from a darker place. They passed rows of open engine bays, towering fuel tanks, and test modules under construction. Engineers zipped around on electric carts, shouting over radio static. The smell of hot metal and innovation hung in the air. Mike didn't say much, but his eyes were scanning everything, like he was seeing both the future and the past in the same breath. "This way," Elon said, leading him to a small observation platform overlooking a development bay. Mike stepped up, gripping the rail. Below, a prototype booster stood surrounded by scaffolding. "That engine mount," Mike murmured. "You welded the wrong angle support. It'll vibrate at 2.1 kHz during atmospheric re-entry." Elon blinked. "You just saw that." Mike nodded. "Heard it in my head." Elon smiled. "Welcome to SpaceX." The smell hit him before the memories did. It wasn't the sterile, pressurized scent of a clean room or the faint ozone tang of electronics. It was something more primal, older. Burnt metal, machine oil, the breath of heat exchangers and welding arcs. Mike stood just past the security threshold, his bare feet barely inside the facility, and stared at the world he hadn't seen in decades, though every bolt and beam felt like it had never left him. He didn't move at first. His shoulders tightened, and his breath caught in a way that made Elon quietly stop beside him. "You okay?" Elon asked. Mike blinked once, then again. His eyes were wide, as if searching for something that wasn't there, or maybe for something he was terrified would still be. "I remember this smell," Mike said finally. His voice was different now, quieter, less theatrical. "It's not just metal. It's what metal remembers." They walked through the corridor slowly, Elon adjusting his pace to match Mike's, who kept glancing up at the fluorescent lights, then at the pipes running above them, like a man mapping old constellations. It was all too familiar. Not because he had been in this building, he hadn't, but because the architecture of aerospace was universal. The language of ducts, mounts, and vibration-dampened walkways whispered in his bones. And then he saw it. They turned a corner into a high-ceiling workshop where a massive second-stage engine core stood half-assembled on a rotating platform. A few technicians were running diagnostics, their voices muffled by headsets and distance. The engine looked beautiful, sleek, imposing, with a new type of turbine module exposed for calibration. Mike stopped mid-step. His breath hitched. The color drained from his face. It was the turbine. Not just any turbine. The turbine. The one he'd warned them about. He didn't scream. He didn't fall to the ground or make a scene. He just stood there, trembling slightly, staring at the burnished copper and steel curves like he was looking into the eyes of something that had tried to kill him and nearly succeeded. "I told them," he whispered. "I told them it would resonate at the wrong frequency, that the containment bracket couldn't handle phase coupling past 180 seconds. Elon looked at him, eyes narrowing. "They didn't listen," Mike added, softer now. "3 people died. I wasn't even allowed to call their families. They said my instability would compromise morale." "Mike," Elon started, stepping forward. But Mike stepped back. His hand reached out toward the turbine, but stopped inches short, like it might burn him if he touched it. Or maybe like it was holy. A voice behind them cut the tension. "Wait a second." Both men turned. From behind a terminal emerged a grizzled technician in his 60s, wearing a stained lab coat and squinting over his glasses. His badge read R. Mendez. The man walked slowly toward Mike, staring at his face like he was trying to place a half-forgotten melody. "I know that look," Mendez said. "I know those eyes." Mike didn't respond. He was still frozen, hovering between past and present. "You're not," Mendez trailed off, brow furrowing. "You can't be Mike Sanderson." Elon's head tilted. "Sanderson?" Mendez nodded. He was a propulsion specialist back in the late 90s. One of the best minds I'd ever seen. Vanished after that Prometheus disaster. Rumor was he lost it. Some said he died. Others said the company paid to make him disappear. Mike let out a dry laugh. "Guess it depends on your definition of disappear." Mendez stepped closer. "My God, it is you? But how?" Mike looked at Elon, as if silently asking permission to speak. Elon gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "They told me to shut up. Said my concerns were unfounded. Then, when it all blew up, literally and politically, they handed me a plane ticket and an NDA the size of a mattress. I refused to sign. Next thing I knew, I woke up in a motel room with no ID and a bottle of lithium I'd never been prescribed. After that, the world stopped calling me anything." Mendez exhaled hard. "Jesus, I thought you were dead." "Close enough," Mike murmured. There was a long pause. No one moved. Then Elon broke the silence. "Mike's working with us now. Or at least, I hope he will." Mike gave him a sharp look. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves." Mendez, still stunned, placed a hand on Mike's shoulder. "You were always too damn good to be swept under the rug. I should have said something. Should have fought harder back then." Mike didn't reply, but for the first time, his shoulders relaxed just a bit. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet, but it was something softer than silence. Later, as they walked down another corridor, this one leading to a quieter, less active wing of the facility. Elon looked at Mike out of the corner of his eye. "I didn't realize you'd lived through that kind of betrayal." "I try not to think about it," Mike said, voice even again. "But buildings have memory. Metal remembers screams." They walked in silence for a while, the only sound being their footsteps echoing off the polished floor. Finally, Elon said, "You don't have to relive it. But if you're willing, I'd like to hear more. In your own time." Mike stopped, staring out a nearby window at the Texas sky. "You know what's funny?" he said. "Everyone always thinks space smells like nothing. But it doesn't. Not when it's close. In here, the stars smell like rust." Elon looked at him, not with pity, but with respect. This man had fallen through cracks no one even knew existed. And somehow, he dragged knowledge with him. They stood there for a moment longer, side by side, two men staring at the edge of the known and unknown. And beyond the window, in the sunlit distance, a new rocket waited, tall, silent, patient, like it knew something was about to change. Victor Harlan watched the video without blinking. It wasn't grainy, like something from a spy thriller. No, this footage was crisp, pulled directly from an open-stream engineering feed that SpaceX rarely realized was monitored by competitors. Officially, there were NDAs and digital walls in place. Unofficially, if you had enough money and no moral compass, everything had cracks. And Victor had both. He paused the frame, zooming in. There he was, the barefoot man with the eyes of a sleepwalker and the gait of someone who used to carry weight that mattered. Standing beside Elon Musk, surrounded by gleaming steel and the nervous reverence of younger engineers. It was the third time in 2 days that the man had appeared on camera. But this time he got a name. Mike Smith. Victor leaned back in his high-backed leather chair, the Los Angeles skyline blazing behind him like a neon battlefield. His office, perched atop Novodyne Aerospace's angular fortress of glass and ambition, was more like a control tower than an executive suite. One entire wall was a digital feed, charts, competitor launches, satellite chatter, and a web of red lines marking influence and intrusion. He tapped his ring against the desk, metal on metal. "Smith," he muttered, "of all the names to use." He turned to his assistant, a stone-faced woman named Clarice, who could silence a boardroom with a single look. "Pull the off-record files from Project Prometheus. Every iteration, every clearance level." Clarice didn't ask why. She only nodded and left without a sound. Victor stood, crossed to the window, and stared out. His reflection hovered over the city like a ghost, superimposed on the empire he helped build. Novodyne wasn't born out of vision. It was born out of precision, surgical, unfeeling, exacting. Where SpaceX threw themselves toward the stars with optimism, Novodyne climbed one engineered rung at a time, never looking down, never dreaming. And Prometheus, that was the rung they stepped on the bodies to reach. He remembered it vividly. A propulsion test that went too far too fast. A paper trail that had to be rewritten, and a man who wouldn't stop screaming about harmonic instability. A man with a chalkboard heart and inconvenient conscience. That man now stood next to Elon Musk, sketching propulsion ideas with charcoal on cardboard and capturing the attention of a global icon with more power than any government-backed think tank. Victor's jaw tightened. This couldn't happen. He returned to his desk just as the tablet lit up with a new file. Prometheus. Internal damage control archived. He opened it. There it was. A face, younger, unshaven, eyes wide with adrenaline and fury. The file still bore the watermark, mentally unstable. High risk. Expunged. Victor remembered the meeting. Remembered the silence when he said, "Make it go away." And it had. Until now. Clarice returned. "Do you want it buried again?" she asked, as if offering to dispose of a problem the way one might discard a defective part. "No," Victor said quietly. "That would only confirm everything if it ever comes to light. What I want is to discredit him, not destroy him. Discredit Musk." Victor gave a low chuckle. "No, you don't go after the lion with a stick. You go after the fleas on his mane. The public loves Musk, and he's too powerful to hit directly. But this man, Mike, he's a question mark. Unstable, erratic, easy to push off balance. Clarice raised an eyebrow. How far? As far as necessary. I want a profile built, medical records, former associates, arrest history. I want to know where he sleeps, what he eats, and who still remembers his name. And I want whispers in the right ears that SpaceX is employing a mentally unstable ex-government engineer with a history of delusions. Clarice nodded. And if the whispers become public, then we leak the Prometheus footage. Not the whole file, just enough to suggest he had a breakdown. Let Musk play defense while we move forward. He turned back to the massive screen, where a paused frame still showed Mike, slightly hunched, eyes distant, hand hovering near a turbine, like a ghost reaching out for its tombstone. Men like him are dangerous not because they lie, Victor murmured, but because they remember too much. He walked slowly across the room to a smaller console and activated a private line. "Connect me to General Adler," he said. "Tell him I want to discuss the Novodyne Defense Initiative. It's time we accelerate the exclusive contract." The line blinked red, encrypted. "Yes, Mr. Harlan," came the voice on the other end. Crisp, controlled, military. "General," Victor said, voice smooth as oil. "We may have a problem brewing in Boca Chica, and I believe it's in both our interests to keep old ghosts from becoming headlines." The general was silent for a moment, then responded, "Understood. Do you want us to intervene?" Victor smiled. "Not yet. Let me see how loud the ghost wants to scream. If he gets noisy, we'll give him a padded room and a diagnosis." As the call ended, Victor poured himself a drink from the crystal decanter near his desk. The liquor was sharp and expensive, like his suits. He sipped slowly, then returned to the screen one last time. "Musk always did love broken things," he muttered. Then, almost affectionately, he whispered, "Let's see if he can fix this one before I break it again." Outside, the sun dipped lower behind the smog-lined horizon. And somewhere hundreds of miles away, a barefoot man was standing in the middle of a rocket factory, unaware that the shadows were already moving toward him. The sound of rustling paper was oddly loud in a digital age. Elon sat in the old archive room beneath SpaceX's main campus, lit by a mix of flickering fluorescent tubes and the afternoon sun bleeding in through a dusty skylight. The room smelled like dry ink, time, and something older, the bureaucratic decay of ambition trapped in binders and storage boxes no one wanted to admit still existed. He flipped through a beige personnel folder labeled Sanderson, M.A. The edges were frayed, the typeface archaic, like it had been typed on a machine that never made it into the 21st century. At the top of the first page, Michael Allen Sanderson, clearance level black, status inactive, disposition disappeared. Elon leaned back in the metal chair, rubbing his eyes. So it was true. Not just the fragments Mike had confessed between sips of coffee and ghost stories, but an official record, stamped and stored. The world hadn't simply forgotten him. It had been instructed to. Across the building, in a modest break room that Elon had emptied for privacy, Mike sat curled in a cushioned chair, a cup of lukewarm tea cradled between his hands. He was watching the window, or rather, the space just beyond it, where the light shimmered over the desert and looked, for a brief second, like the inside of an engine's combustion chamber. Elon entered quietly. "I found you," he said. Mike blinked. "Was I lost?" "In every way that matters." He handed over the folder. Mike stared at it for a long time before resting it beside him, unopened. "I don't need to read it," he said. "I remember what it felt like." Elon took a seat opposite him. There was no urgency between them anymore, only gravity, the silent kind, the force that pulls things into orbit even when they try to float away. "I thought I was saving lives," Mike said. "When Prometheus failed, I kept replaying the warning signs in my head. The harmonic vibration, the thermal loading. I reported them all. And yet, when the explosion happened, it was like I was the bomb." "They needed a scapegoat," Elon said. "No," Mike replied. "They needed silence, and I wouldn't give it to them." He stared into his tea. "I used to believe that intelligence was armor," he continued. That if you knew enough, saw enough, spoke the language of the universe well enough, nothing could touch you. But pain doesn't care how smart you are. Trauma isn't impressed by resumes. Elon didn't speak. He listened. Really listened. Not the way CEOs listen to quarterly reports or engineers listen to numbers, but the way a man listens when he knows another is finally giving him something rare. Truth. I spent weeks in a facility after the explosion, Mike went on. No windows. Observational holding, they called it. I don't remember much except the color beige and a nurse who hummed Sinatra. Then one morning, they gave me a plastic bag with $50, a change of clothes, and told me I'd been granted early release. From what, they didn't say. I wandered out the door and didn't stop walking for 10 years. A long silence followed. Then Mike added, almost in a whisper, "You ever feel like your life is a house you don't have the key to anymore?" Elon nodded. "Sometimes I wonder if I built mine without any doors." That earned a soft, broken laugh from Mike. The first in days. "You know," he said, "you're not what I expected." People say that, usually before they criticize me. I meant it as a compliment. They sat for a moment in mutual understanding. Two men on opposite sides of a mirror, neither quite whole, both cracked in ways no resume would reflect. Elon reached into his pocket and pulled out a small flash drive. "I want you to look at something," he said, placing it gently on the table. "It's a current prototype for a closed-cycle methane system. We've hit a thermal bottleneck we can't seem to route around." Mike glanced at it, but didn't touch it. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because I think you can help," Elon said. "Not as a test, not as a charity case, but as a peer." Mike looked down at his hands. They were calloused, cracked, the nails yellowed with time. He flexed his fingers slowly, as if remembering they once belonged to a man who built stars. "No titles," Mike said. "None. No suits. No public appearances. I don't do suits either. And I come and go when I want. You're not a prisoner, Mike." Mike looked up. His eyes were still tired, but behind them was the spark of something ancient. Not rage, not sadness. Purpose. "You really believe people like me still have value?" Elon nodded. "I believe the system tried to erase you because it was afraid of what you still know. And I don't fear that kind of mind. I respect it." Mike picked up the flash drive, turning it over like a relic. "I don't know if I can fix anything." "Start by looking," Elon said. "That's how all fixes begin." For the first time, Mike smiled, not with humor, but with the quiet relief of a man who's just been allowed to matter again. They didn't shake hands. They didn't need to. As Elon left the room, Mike turned to the folder and, for the first time in years, opened a record that bore his name. It wasn't to confirm anything. It was to remember what had been stolen. The lab doors hissed open like a secret being reluctantly shared. Cool, recycled air met the smell of machine oil and fresh solder. Humming computers blinked beside half-dismantled engine cores, and rows of thick cables snaked across the concrete like arteries. Elon led the way, but all eyes, every last one, were on Mike. He walked slowly, almost awkwardly, like someone trying not to leave footprints where he didn't feel he belonged. He still wore the same layered, worn clothes, a green canvas jacket, corduroy pants 2 sizes too big, and a pair of rubber flip-flops that made a tired slap with every step. In a lab full of SpaceX engineers in polos and badges, Mike looked like a misplaced street poet. And yet no one laughed. Not after what they'd heard. Not after word spread about the man who saw turbulence patterns before they were modeled, who corrected a formula written by 3 PhDs using chalk, who, when asked how he knew, simply said, "Because I remember the way the metal vibrates when it's afraid." Now, Mike stood in front of the test engine. It was tall, 15 feet, and mounted vertically on a reinforced cradle, wrapped in telemetry wires and active cooling lines. The team was prepping it for a full-pressure cycle next week. A few engineers stood nearby, skeptical but silent. Mike walked around the engine slowly, his hand never touching it, but always near, hovering like a dowser's rod. His eyes traced welds, seams venting flares. He paused at a pressure coupling and narrowed his gaze. "This isn't going to hold," he said flatly. One of the lead engineers, Jared, stepped forward. "Excuse me." Mike turned, pointing to a small connection just above the stabilizer mount. "This seam, it's undercut. Probably a millimeter, maybe two. Not a problem at sea level, but pressurize it beyond 2000 psi in sub-zero temps and it'll shear. Not catastrophically, but enough to scrub emission." The lab went still. Jared looked toward another engineer who wordlessly grabbed a scanner and approached the turbine. Beeps filled the space. Then silence. "Undercut," the engineer confirmed. 2.2 millimeters. Jaws tightened. Eyes widened. Mike didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He just turned and walked toward the next coupling, as though he hadn't just outperformed a $250,000 quality control system with his bare eyes. Elon watched from a distance. His arms were crossed, his expression unreadable, equal parts pride, fascination, and something closer to awe. Meanwhile, across the country, in a penthouse conference suite in Washington, D.C., Victor Harlan was stirring water into a neat glass of bourbon, a telltale sign he was angry. "Who leaked the lab feed?" he asked coldly. No one at the long walnut table answered. Victor turned to a congressman seated across from him, a man with perfectly parted silver hair and the forced smile of someone who owed too many favors. "You said Boca Chica was isolated," Victor said. The congressman fidgeted. "We assumed Musk's media restrictions would keep it quiet. We underestimated the internals." "You underestimated him," Victor snapped. The congressman glanced at his aide, who immediately slid a tablet across the table. On the screen was a paused video, Mike standing in the lab, pointing toward the coupling. In the background, engineers looked on, visibly impressed. Victor studied it in silence. "He's not just a liability," Victor muttered. "He's a spectacle, which makes him dangerous." "Then discredit him," the aide said. "We plant psych eval. Reignite the unstable scientist narrative. If you can tie it to Prometheus." "No," Victor interrupted. "Not yet. The more we push, the more questions they'll ask. We do this quietly." He turned to the congressman again. "Find me someone in state licensing. I want his name flagged. Any attempt to verify his identity, housing, employment blocked. Frozen. If Musk tries to give him an official position, it needs to backfire." The congressman nodded hesitantly. "That can be arranged." "And while you're at it," Victor added, swirling his drink, "pull his file again. I want confirmation, visual, behavioral, that this really is Mike Sanderson. You think he might not be?" Victor leaned forward, voice like ice. "I think ghosts don't age like men do. And if he is who I think he is, we need to make sure he never gets to speak in front of a microphone." Back in Texas, Mike leaned against a railing overlooking the cooling tanks. Sweat beaded at his temple, not from exertion, but from sheer emotional overload. It was all coming back, the hum, the resonance, the near-religious rhythm of science, before bureaucracy crushed it. Elon walked over and handed him a bottle of water. "You okay?" he asked. Mike nodded, but his voice was thin. "I haven't been around this much energy in years." "You handled it well." They didn't laugh. They wouldn't dare. Mike looked down at his feet, the flip-flops, the frayed hem of his pants, the scar that still ran like a fault line across his left hand. "I don't even have a driver's license, Elon. No address. No resume. If you looked me up in a database, I'd show up as a ghost. Who the hell listens to ghosts?" Elon smiled faintly. "You just saved an engine worth $30 million with your eyes, Mike. I don't care if you live in a lighthouse or a hammock. You're not a ghost. You're a mirror. And we've all been afraid to look." Mike didn't respond right away. Then, softly, "You really think I can come back from this?" Elon shrugged. "I don't think you left." They stood there a moment, overlooking the belly of one of the world's most ambitious engineering temples. And somewhere far from view, systems began moving against them, quietly, strategically, determined to bury a man who'd already clawed his way back from the dirt. The sun had already started to slip westward, casting long shadows across the floor of Elon's private workspace, a room few had entered, and even fewer had sat in as guests. Mike sat in one of the industrial-style chairs, legs crossed, hands wrapped around a bottle of mineral water he hadn't opened. He kept glancing at the floor-to-ceiling whiteboard along the back wall, filled with notes, sketches, and equations, but his eyes weren't really focused on any of them. Elon stood across from him, a tablet in his hands. The screen glowed with a freshly drafted document. Consultancy Agreement, Mike A. Sanderson, Honorary Engineering Advisor. I'm not trying to put you in a cage, Elon said carefully. This isn't about labels or PR. It's just an acknowledgement of your contribution, your insight, your place here. Mike didn't respond right away. I've been in cages before, he said, finally, voice quiet. The walls were different. Padded sometimes, metal other times. But they always came after someone said I was too important to ignore. That's usually the last thing you hear before the erasure begins. Elon set the tablet down. This isn't about control. There are no cameras, no press release. I just want you to know you have a role, a real one, not charity, not pity. Mike tapped the water bottle nervously. And what happens when I start remembering things I shouldn't? He asked. What happens when your board starts asking questions about my past? Or when someone pulls a file from some dusty government archive and realizes I wasn't just a name that went missing, I was a name they made disappear. Elon sat across from him, elbows on the table. Then we deal with it together. Mike looked at him for a long moment. You keep saying that. We. But I've been me alone for so long. I'm not sure I remember how to be part of a we anymore. Elon gave a faint smile. Start small. Be a we for one day. Then decide. Mike reached out slowly, picked up the tablet, and read the first few lines. The words felt heavy, not because of the legalese, but because they represented something he thought he'd never see again. Belonging. He set the tablet back down. Not yet, he said. Let me breathe a little longer before I put my name to anything again. Elon nodded. Fair enough. That night, Mike returned to the small prefab unit Elon had arranged for him, a simple, clean space at the edge of the facility grounds. Inside, it smelled like dust, laundry soap, and new beginnings. On the table near the kitchenette was a thick manila envelope. No postage, no address, just one word in black marker. Mike. He froze. Slowly, he peeled open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded once. Typed. Precise. You were warned. Stay quiet. The Prometheus fire wasn't an accident. You weren't meant to survive. We still have reach. Next time we won't miss. Mike stared at the words for a long time. Then he turned the paper over. There was a small emblem on the back, a faded watermark he hadn't seen in years. It was the old logo from Subdivision 31, the shadow branch that had once overseen classified propulsion testing in the late 90s. He sat down slowly. The walls seemed closer now. The silence inside the unit more complete. The past hadn't just knocked on the door, it had let itself in. The next morning, Elon walked into his office and found Clarice, Victor Harlan's assistant, on the security screen. Not in person, not officially. Just her image, frozen in a paused email video attachment sent to Elon's legal counsel. The message was clear. The presence of Mr. Sanderson on SpaceX property constitutes a violation of national security protocols tied to Project Prometheus. Further engagement with him will be viewed as an act of negligence, and legal intervention will follow. Elon tossed the tablet onto the desk, lips tightening. Victor's getting sloppy, he muttered. Lauren, one of his top legal advisors, stood nearby. He's not aiming to stop you in court. He's setting the groundwork to justify a federal freeze. If they can claim Mike represents a security anomaly, they can push for restricted access, maybe even a direct order to expel him. He's bluffing. Maybe, Lauren said, but his bluff still wastes our time and makes others nervous. Investors don't like ghosts in headlines. Elon looked out the window, jaw clenched. Then maybe it's time we gave Mike a voice of his own, instead of letting Victor define him. Lauren raised a brow. You're going to let him speak publicly? No, Elon said. I'm going to let him decide if he wants to. Back at the unit, Mike sat on his small bed, the threat letter on his lap. He'd read it 6 times. Not out of fear, not out of paranoia, but because he recognized the language. Not just the phrasing, but the syntax, the way the threat was written, the rhythm of it, the font, the choice of reach instead of power, the precise omission of any names. It was written by someone who had once worked with him, someone who'd been in the room when they built Prometheus, someone who knew he wouldn't scare easily, and who was trying anyway. He folded the letter carefully, slid it into the back of a notebook, and stood up. Then, for the first time since arriving, he opened the tablet Elon had left for him days ago and opened a blank document. At the top, he typed, "They said I was gone. Here's what they missed." Elon had seen classified documents before, folders so redacted they looked like ink art, pages stripped of meaning, under the weight of government ink. But this was different. This folder had teeth. It arrived on his desk via an anonymous courier. No return address, no metadata on the encrypted flash drive. Just a handwritten note. He was right. We were all wrong. GR. He recognized the initials. Jonathan Reeve, a propulsion analyst who'd vanished after the Prometheus test program collapsed over a decade ago. Rumor had it he'd fled to South America after testifying in a closed-door hearing. Elon hadn't heard his name in years. He inserted the drive. What emerged was a story told in silent scans and time-stamped audio clips, a chain of emails between engineers, field reports, thermal diagnostics, and one final voice recording. The entire archive smelled of panic dressed in protocol. Elon sat in stunned silence, scrolling. One line hit him like an uppercut to the soul. Lead propulsion analyst Michael A. Sanderson submitted a phase for vibration risk memo 3 days before Event 0. It was received, marked low priority, and shelved without review. Then came the final report, the one Elon had only heard about in rumors. Event 0. The footage was grainy, infrared from a test drone hovering over an isolated launch site, a prototype Prometheus booster chained to a static fire cradle. It ignited. It screamed. Then, at T plus 18 seconds, it imploded inward like a dying star. Flames engulfed the camera. Screams followed. 3 engineers dead. The silence after that footage wasn't just in Elon's office. It echoed inside him. Mike had warned them, and they buried his warning. Later that evening, Elon found Mike in the darkened observation deck, sitting alone, legs folded under him, staring at the night sky through the massive glass panes like it was a puzzle he was trying to reassemble. Elon sat beside him without a word. They were quiet for a while, the stars blinking like Morse code across the void. "I saw it," Elon finally said. Mike didn't turn. The video, the report, the warnings, the memo they ignored. Mike exhaled, slow and steady. "I wrote it at 3 a.m. with a shaking hand. I remember thinking, they won't read this until after someone dies." "They didn't," Elon said. "They read it after you disappeared." Mike's mouth twitched. "You know," he said softly, "I didn't vanish. I was erased. They called it a mental health sabbatical. Gave me pills I'd never heard of. When I fought back, I woke up in a different state with no ID and $20 in my sock." Elon felt the quiet rage curling under Mike's calm. Not bitterness, grief. "You were right," Elon said. "That engine, it never stood a chance." Mike finally looked at him. His eyes were wet, but he didn't blink. 3 people died, Elon, and I couldn't stop it. I should have. I could have screamed louder. Filed a whistleblower report. Gone to the press. "No," Elon interrupted. "You tried. They silenced you. You were one man against an institution afraid of delay, afraid of cost, afraid of admitting imperfection. You did everything you could." Mike rubbed his palms together like he was trying to scrub off the past. "Do you know what they called the final Prometheus flight internally?" he asked. Elon shook his head. "Comet Prometheus." Mike said bitterly, "because it was supposed to burn so bright it'd light up the sky. And like its namesake, it was punishment wrapped in fire." He stood suddenly and walked to the railing. "I carry them with me," he said. "The 3 who died. Every time I see flame, I hear their names. Every time someone says thrust vectoring, I hear the scream of melting titanium." Elon stood too. You don't have to carry that alone anymore. Mike turned to him, eyes raw. Then help me say their names. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, Victor Harlan threw the same flash drive across his desk, where it bounced, cracked open, and spun to stop like a bullet casing. Across from him sat Clarice, arms crossed. They know, Victor muttered. They have the Reeve files. Clarice didn't flinch. Should we escalate? Victor stared at the cracked drive. We already failed to erase him once. If we push too hard now, it'll only confirm everything. Then what's the move? Victor paced, his shoes clicking like a metronome of menace. We reframe it. Release a leak of our own, something polished. We spin Mike as a brilliant but unstable mind. Erratic but earnest. Show that we supported him as long as we could. Then, when things went wrong, we took the fall quietly out of respect for the families. And the actual families? We pay them, or ignore them, or ruin them. Depends who talks first. Clarice nodded slowly. And Musk? Victor's lip curled. Musk is too high profile to hit directly. But the people around him, they bleed easier. He turned back toward the dark city skyline and raised a glass to the reflection in the window. Let them chase ghosts, he muttered. I bury them. Back in Texas, Mike sat at a workbench late into the night. A tablet in front of him, a fresh diagram opened, an updated thrust chamber based on Prometheus designs, modified with new thermal vectors and a dual redundancy intake valve. Next to the diagram, he'd written 3 names: Garcia, Patel, Lenning. Below them, one line: for the ones who burned trying to reach the stars. The house wasn't big, it didn't need to be. It stood quietly at the edge of the SpaceX grounds, a 1-bedroom prefab nestled under the shade of 2 stubborn mesquite trees. Solar panels lined the roof, desert wildflowers sprouted along the walkway, and the porch creaked just enough to remind you that it was real, not simulated. Mike stood on the threshold for a full minute before stepping inside. It had been years since he'd had a front door to open, years since the simple geometry of home meant anything more than shelter from the wind. The interior smelled faintly of cedar and fresh linen. A bookshelf had already been stocked, a curated mix of science, philosophy, and fiction. A second-hand record player waited in the corner with a milk crate of old vinyls labeled for late-night thinking. On the kitchen counter, a handwritten note from Elon sat folded under a keyring. It's not much, but it's yours. Welcome back to gravity. Mike let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. He walked to the window and watched the light settle on the sand. Quietness had always made him nervous. Too much silence reminded him of test chambers and padded rooms. But this silence was different. This silence listened. He unpacked the few belongings he had: a notebook, a charred drawing from a cardboard days, a chunk of chalk wrapped in fabric, and the flash drive Elon had given him weeks earlier. He placed them on the desk. Then, almost instinctively, he sat down, pulled a pencil from a drawer, and began to draw. Mornings became sacred. Mike would wake at 6 a.m. sharp, not out of discipline, but because his body still worked on engineer's time. He'd drink instant coffee from a chipped mug with a Saturn V logo, sit at the back steps of the porch, and sketch whatever mechanical thought visited him that day. His drawings weren't blueprints, not exactly. They were a hybrid of poetry and design, sometimes abstract spirals of exhaust plumes, sometimes turbines twisted like Mobius strips. Elon had stopped asking for explanations and simply started archiving them. One morning, a young engineer named Kira, barely 25 and full of questions, found Mike at the whiteboard outside the hangar. "Why are your diagrams always tilted?" she asked curiously. Mike grinned, eyes twinkling. "Because nothing in space is straight. It's all dancing." She laughed. "That's either brilliant or totally insane." Mike shrugged. The best ideas start with not knowing which. From then on, Kira brought him questions, sometimes real, sometimes philosophical. What would you name a rocket if it never had to land? Does entropy care how we feel about it? Mike answered each one with a mix of riddles and equations. The younger staff began calling him the Oracle. He hated it. Secretly, it made him feel whole. Afternoons were quieter. He spent them walking the perimeter or reading old texts. On some days, he'd sit in the makeshift library Elon had built just for him, a converted trailer with climate control and walls of books. He read Vonnegut, Sagan, Bradbury, and even some Rumi, leaving pencil notes in the margins. And sometimes he'd stare at one photo tucked between the pages of a dog-eared engineering manual, a small, faded Polaroid of a girl. She looked about 5, with big eyes and curls that tangled like magnetic coils. He never told anyone where the photo came from, until one particular night. It was dusk when Elon showed up, unannounced but expected. He brought 2 beers and no questions. They sat on the back porch, feet up, watching the stars wake up. "I heard the Falcon team started using your nozzle curve," Elon said casually. Mike sipped his beer. "I didn't tell them they could." Elon smiled. "You didn't have to." They fell into silence for a while. Then Mike reached into his back pocket and pulled out the Polaroid. He handed it to Elon without a word. "She's..." Elon began. "My daughter," Mike said. "I think." "You think?" "I only saw her once, at a court hearing. I wasn't exactly stable then. They gave full custody to her mother. I wasn't allowed contact." Elon held the photo gently, as if afraid it might crumble. "She must be grown now," Mike added. "Could be in college. Could be somewhere warm. Or somewhere cold. I like to imagine she's building things, not because of me, but in spite of me." Elon looked at him. "You ever tried to find her?" Mike shook his head. "I barely knew my own name for 10 years. She deserves peace, not my damage." He took the photo back, stared at it. "But sometimes I wonder," he whispered, "if maybe she remembers my voice. Or a word I said before the world fell apart." Elon didn't speak. He just placed a hand on Mike's shoulder, steady and real. "You're still building things," he said. "Maybe one of them leads her to you." Mike smiled, a real smile. Tired, cracked, but honest. "I'd name that Rocket Heaven," he said. "Not because I believe in it, but because I'd finally have a place to call it." Back inside, Mike returned to his desk, picked up a fresh sheet of paper, and began sketching a design labeled simply, "Project Haven." He underlined it once, then twice. Outside, the stars spun slowly overhead, not to remind him how far he'd fallen, but how far he could still rise. The ballroom at the Aero Global Summit in Houston was everything you'd expect from an event where ambition was served on polished silver and power dressed in tailored Italian wool. Chandeliers hung like frozen fireworks over a sea of executives, military brass, engineers, and opportunists. Laughter buzzed in corners, champagne flutes clinked like glass metronomes, and behind every polite nod was a conversation sharpened like a blade. Elon Musk stood near the center of it all, wearing a black jacket over a crisp dark shirt, no tie, a deliberate choice. Around him, clusters of younger engineers hovered, orbiting like satellites around a central gravitational field. But Elon wasn't really listening. His mind, even here, was elsewhere, in turbines, thrust curves, and the voice of a man who once called space a place where steel learns to sing. Then came the stillness, like a tremor just before the quake. Elon sensed it before he saw him. Victor Harlan. He cut through the room like a surgeon, all perfect angles and smooth motion. His suit was navy, his tie a muted red that whispered influence instead of shouting it. At his side was Clarice, silent and sharp-eyed. Victor moved with the certainty of someone used to being welcomed or feared, or both. "Elon," he said, extending a hand. "Glad you could make it." Elon shook it, firmly, without warmth. "Wouldn't miss it," he replied. "Always good to see who's still clinging to the illusion of diplomacy." Victor chuckled. "Oh, come now. I'm just here for the shrimp cocktail and whispered war games." They posed for a moment like allies, 2 giants of aerospace shaking hands under the camera flashes of industry media. But under their smiles, something colder churned. "Word is," Victor continued, "you've taken quite a liking to your new consultant." "Elaborate," Elon said coolly. "Mike, Victor replied, lowering his voice just enough to keep the conversation contained. Or should I say Michael Allen Sanderson, formerly of Subdivision 31, currently a legal gray area the size of Nevada. He's more than legal, Elon said. He's human. Victor's smile didn't budge. That may be, but humanity doesn't clear security checks or survive background audits. You're tying your name, your company, to a man flagged as a high-risk anomaly. Elon's eyes sharpened. You mean the same man who warned about a system failure that killed 3 people? Victor's face remained neutral. That report was circumstantial. Investigated. Closed. Buried, Elon said. And I intend to dig. Around them, a few heads turned. The buzz in the room subtly shifted. Conversation stalled, ears tuned. Victor leaned in just slightly. You're playing a dangerous game. The industry has long memories and short tempers. You keep stirring the Prometheus ashes, and you might find yourself shut out of the next generation of contracts. Elon took a step back, raised his glass, and tapped it gently with his ring. The sound rang through the ballroom like a bell. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, turning toward the crowd, if I could borrow 2 minutes of your ears. Cameras turned. Conversation stopped entirely. Elon's voice carried, firm, clear, and stripped of pretense. I've been approached tonight with a concern, not about rockets or engines, but about integrity. About whether giving a forgotten man a voice threatens the comfort of powerful institutions. He didn't name Victor. He didn't need to. You've all heard of Mike Smith. Some of you may know him by another name. He was part of a project called Prometheus, a propulsion prototype that was scrubbed from the records after a catastrophic failure. 3 engineers died. Mike saw it coming. He filed the warnings. And for that, he was silenced, erased, and abandoned. A silence settled over the room that felt like oxygen being vacuumed out. He's not a liability, Elon continued. He's a reminder that truth doesn't age, and failure to listen has consequences. I won't be shamed for giving him a desk and a door. I won't be threatened out of acknowledging his worth. Victor's jaw tensed. He didn't move. I stand here not just for innovation, Elon said, but for accountability. And if bringing the truth about Prometheus to light means losing a few contracts, then let them go. Some rockets aren't worth launching if the price is silence. The room erupted, applause, some hesitant, some fierce. Others simply stood stunned, unsure how to react. Victor didn't clap. He simply straightened his cuff, turned to Clarice, and murmured, he just declared war. Later that evening, as Elon stepped out into the night, the air cooler now under the Houston sky, he found a familiar figure waiting by the parked Tesla near the curb. Mike, wearing a clean windbreaker over his worn clothes, standing still with a paper cup of coffee in his hands, like he didn't quite belong among the valet cars and neon. You lit a match in there, Mike said, not smiling. You sure you're ready to burn with me? Elon opened the passenger door for him. No one burns alone. Not anymore. Mike got in. As the car pulled away, Victor Harlan watched from an upper window in the venue, face unreadable, fingers steepled. He didn't blink. He just whispered to himself, let's see how much truth you can carry before it crushes you. The envelope was old. Not aged in the romantic, yellowed paper sense, but worn in a way that spoke of fear, of being passed from hand to hand behind closed doors, slipped between bookshelves, hidden beneath floorboards. The label on the front read, simply, for Elon from J. Myers. Elon held it cautiously. The name struck a chord. James Myers, retired systems engineer, former propulsion advisor at Subdivision 31, widely considered a relic of a forgotten era, one of the last men to walk away from Prometheus with his mind intact and his conscience haunted. The letter inside was typed, mechanical, precise. Mr. Musk, I watched your speech. I remembered your face from long ago, but your words tonight were new. Bold, dangerous. The truth needs danger to survive. This is the report we were told never to acknowledge. They called it Phase 4, Post-Ignition Vibration Analysis. Sanderson wrote it. I backed it. Harlan buried it. I hope this sets something right. Myers. Behind the letter was the document itself. 15 pages. Dated 2 days before the Event Zero incident. Elon read through it, his hands slowly tightening with each line. There it was, in black and white. Projected structural fatigue onset, 16 to 20 seconds post-ignition under test load. Recommend immediate suspension of static fire and full design review. Attached were vibration readings, thermal simulations, structural integrity models. It was airtight, undeniable. And at the bottom of the final page, handwritten in blue ink, "They won't listen, but I have to try. MES." Elon closed the folder and stared at the wall for a long time. He found Mike at the edge of the test range, sitting on a low rail with his knees pulled up and his back against the fencing. He was sketching again, a habit that returned every time his thoughts needed somewhere else to live. Elon sat beside him silently and placed the folder between them. "What's this?" Mike asked without looking. "Closure," Elon said. Mike stopped drawing. The pencil trembled in his hand. He opened the folder slowly, scanning the title, then flipping through the pages one by one. With each line, his breath got shallower. By page 6, he was gripping the edges so tightly the paper crinkled under his fingers. By page 10, he stopped reading and just stared forward. Elon didn't say anything. He knew the silence was fuller than any words. Mike closed the folder. His voice, when it came, was nearly a whisper. "They knew." He looked at Elon, not with anger, but with something worse, realization. "They knew. I warned them. I wrote it down. And they told me I was broken. They told me I imagined it. Made me doubt my own memory, my own mind." Tears formed but didn't fall. "Not yet. I wasn't crazy," he said. "I was right." And then, finally, after all these years, his shoulders collapsed forward and he wept. Not the soft tears of grief, but the guttural, cracking sobs of a man unburying himself from a grave someone else dug. "I tried to save them," Mike said through the tears. "I tried to save everyone, and they erased me for it." Elon placed a hand gently on his back, firm and steady. "You didn't fail them, Mike," he said. "They failed you, but the truth is yours now. No one else gets to write your story." Mike wiped his face on his sleeve, shaking his head like he couldn't quite believe any of this was real. "All these years," he muttered, "I thought I was the crack in the system, but I was the warning label they tore off." He let the wind dry the rest of his tears. Then he looked up. "What do we do now?" he asked. Elon answered without hesitation. "We show the world." The leak hit the media the next morning. Redacted copies of the Prometheus Phase 4 report were published by independent investigative outlets. Subdivision 31's buried memos, test data, engineer testimony, and most damning of all, the letter from James Myers confirming that the report had been suppressed on orders from Victor Harlan himself. The aerospace world ignited. Reporters swarmed Novodyne headquarters. Senators called for hearings. Former engineers came forward with additional fragments of documentation. The names Garcia, Patel, and Lenning began trending across every major platform, no longer statistics but martyrs. And at the center of it all was the name that once didn't exist. Michael Allen Sanderson, not as a ghost, but as a voice. Victor Harlan sat in his corner office, staring out at the LA skyline like it had personally betrayed him. Clarice stood behind him, stone-faced. "They have it all," she said. Victor didn't reply. "They'll subpoena internal records, maybe even freeze the defense contracts." Still nothing. Finally, Victor whispered, "Then we bury the body and torch the house." Clarice raised an eyebrow. "Meaning?" "We don't deny it anymore," he said. "We discredit it. Question the chain of custody. Claim it was tampered with. Turn Sanderson into a sympathy case with a mental history. Make Musk look like he exploited him for a headline. And if that fails..." Victor turned slowly, his eyes colder than glass. "Then we make sure the next fire doesn't leave witnesses." Back in Boca Chica, Mike stood before a new prototype booster. This one bore no number, no name yet, just his initials in small letters on the internal diagram. He ran his hand across the cool surface. "I don't want revenge," he said. Elon stood beside him. "Then what do you want?" Mike smiled, soft but steady. "A future that never forgets again." By the time anyone noticed he was missing, Mike had already walked 3 miles into the Boca Chica desert. No bag, no phone, just silence and wind. The kind of wind that speaks in whispers, not to haunt, but to remind you what it feels like to be small, exposed, and painfully alive. At first, no one panicked. Mike had always been prone to wandering when thoughts overwhelmed him. But when the sun began to lean west and shadows stretched like ancient hands across the ground, Elon started asking questions. "Check the perimeter cams," he said. "Thermal if you have to." He doesn't do this without a reason. They found him just after golden hour, a tiny silhouette against the vastness of the desert, sitting cross-legged on a flat boulder like some forgotten monk from an alternate universe. The wind tugged at his worn clothes. His flip-flops were set beside him, and his bare feet rested in the sand. His eyes were locked on the sky, not in wonder, but in stillness. Elon parked quietly, far enough not to startle him, and approached without a word. His boots crunched on the dry dirt. A hawk called out in the distance, circling something unseen. Mike didn't turn. "You ever think about how many people died before anyone learned to write?" he asked, voice almost lost to the wind. Elon sat beside him on the boulder, mirroring his posture. "All the time," he said. "Civilizations will never know. Ideas that bloomed and died without ink." Mike nodded. "Sometimes I wonder if that's what I was meant to be. A flare. Brief. Bright. Unwritten." "You weren't unwritten," Elon said. "I was erased," Mike corrected. Silence. "Then, you remember that report? The last page. I wrote that by hand. Not because they didn't give me a terminal, but because I didn't trust their systems. I knew it would be flagged before it ever reached the top. So I printed one version and kept the other in a locker just in case." Elon waited. "When Myers sent you that document," Mike said, "I cried not because I was vindicated, but because it meant I hadn't hallucinated my own conviction." He finally turned to Elon. "That's what shame does. It makes you doubt the only pure thing you ever did." Elon studied him closely. There was no fragility in Mike's voice, no desperation. Just a fatigue so deep it had crystallized into calm. "You didn't run from the truth," Elon said. "You ran from what they made you believe about yourself." Mike looked back at the sky. "You know what's worse than being forgotten?" he asked. "What?" "Being remembered wrong." The wind kicked up, sending dust across the flat expanse. The 2 men sat unmoving as the world shifted around them. Elon picked up a smooth stone from the dirt and turned it over in his hand. "You're not a footnote, Mike," he said. "You're a formula written in the margin because the page wasn't wide enough." Mike smiled at that. "Barely." Elon went on. "You think archives matter. You think history lives in the black text of official reports. But I've seen men leave a deeper legacy in how they hand someone a wrench. In a line of code only one intern ever sees. In the way they speak truth when no one's listening." He placed the stone on the boulder between them. "Memory isn't in paper. It's in gestures." Mike exhaled deeply. "I used to believe the universe was a machine," he said. "Equations, inputs, outcomes. But now, I think it's more like a song. One long, impossible melody. And some of us, we're just a single note that no one hears unless they're paying attention." "They're listening now," Elon said, "because you sang anyway." The walk back was slow. Mike didn't rush. Elon didn't pressure. They moved together like men returning from a battlefield no one else had seen. The kind fought not with weapons, but with memory and meaning. At the facility gate, one of the younger engineers spotted them and jogged over. "Hey, Mike," he started, but then froze. "Sorry. Just glad you're okay." Mike looked at him, nodded, then placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "I'm not okay," he said, "but I'm here. That's enough for today." The engineer nodded, understanding more than he could say. That night, Mike returned to his desk in the small house. He opened his notebook and stared at a blank page. Then, slowly, deliberately, he wrote one line. The smallest particle of shame is silence. Below it, he sketched the outline of a new rocket design, one not based on velocity, but resonance. Not thrust, but balance. A system that would not just lift, but listen. At the top of the page, he scrawled a name. Project Singularity. Not because it was about isolation, but because it was about collapsing everything into truth. The lab buzzed differently now. It wasn't the sterile, surgical hum of status reports or patent deadlines. It was looser, almost musical. Laughter, the scratch of pencils on paper, the occasional "wait, what if we?" shouted across the room. It was energy, raw and hopeful. And at the heart of it was Mike Smith, barefoot as always, seated on a wheeled stool, surrounded by chalkboards filled with messy, evolving ideas. To one side of him was Kira, arms crossed, eyebrow raised. On the other, two interns, fresh out of school, eyes wide, absorbing every word like scripture. The project, codenamed Halcyon, wasn't just theoretical. It aimed to redesign short-range propulsion systems using fully closed-cycle Methalox engines with minimal carbon yield. But more than a technical leap, it had become something spiritual. A statement. Clean burn. Honest thrust. No hiding. And no one could have led it better than the man who once burned in silence. "You've got your combustion ratios flipped," Mike told one of the interns, pointing to a scribbled line of equations. "Unless you want the nozzle to scream like a banshee at ignition." The kid turned beet red. "Sorry, Mike waved a hand. "Good mistake. You'll never forget it now. I once flipped a staging sequence and lit a test engine upside down. Best failure of my life." The room broke into laughter. Kira rolled her eyes. "How do you survive this long and still trust the math?" Mike looked at her with a grin. "Because math doesn't lie. People do. Institutions do. But the numbers are always trying to tell the truth." Later that afternoon, Elon dropped by, not as a CEO, not even as a supervisor, just as Elon. He leaned in the doorway, watching Mike mid-lecture, spinning a small 3D model of a combustion chamber on his tablet with the tip of his finger. The younger engineers were taking notes, nodding, even arguing playfully, and Mike let them. He fed the debate, encouraged failure. It was beautiful. After the others cleared out, Elon walked over and dropped two cold cans of yerba made on the desk. "You're corrupting my team," he said with a smirk. Mike cracked his can open. They were already curious. "I just gave them permission to be loud about it." They sat in silence for a few beats, sipping, side by side, watching the sun angle through the glass. Then Elon said, "You're building more than engines here." Mike raised an eyebrow. "And what's that mean, Prophet?" "I mean they're going to remember this, you. The way you made failure feel like possibility again. That's rare." Mike chuckled softly. "Let's not carve statues yet." "I'm not talking statues," Elon said. "I'm talking echoes. Cultural inertia. You've got it now." That quieted Mike. He looked down at his hands, calloused and cracked, hands that had built rockets, drawn warnings, held nothing for years. Now they held something again. Tools. Trust. But underneath all of it, he still felt the weight of something he hadn't named. He turned to Elon. "You ever feel like the world's only going to remember your last mistake?" Elon didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Yeah, almost every day." That surprised Mike. "You? With your press, your launches, your legend?" Elon stared out the window, eyes distant. "That's the thing about legends. They're brittle. People remember the headline, not the heart. You crash one rocket, delay one system, or make one bad call, and they write your obituary in advance." Mike nodded slowly. "So we're both afraid of being forgotten." "No," Elon corrected. "We're afraid of being misremembered." That landed. Mike leaned back in his chair, legs stretched out. "When they burned the records of Prometheus," he said, "I thought the worst part was losing the credit. But it wasn't. It was thinking no one would know why I did what I did." "Now they know," Elon said. "But the ones who died?" Mike asked quietly. "They don't get a lab named after them. No headlines. Just initials carved into a memorial no one visits." Elon paused. Then let's change that. The next morning, a bronze plaque appeared at the entrance of the Halcyon lab. Simple, unadorned. It read, "In memory of those who warned, who listened, and who tried. Garcia, Patel, Lenning." Beneath their names, a quote, "Failure isn't the opposite of success, it's the foundation of it." MES. Mike stood staring at it for a long time. Kira stepped up beside him. "Did you write that?" "I lived it," he said. She didn't speak, but placed a hand gently on his arm. That was enough. By evening, Mike sat with Elon again, this time outside, watching a new test booster roll down the tarmac, escorted by ground crew and the late afternoon sun. It was sleek clean and marked discreetly with the Halcyon insignia. "I never thought I'd see my initials on a rocket again," Mike said. Elon smiled. "Funny thing about orbit, it humbles everyone. Even the ones who get their name printed on the side." Mike chuckled. "In orbit, we're all small. But that's what makes it beautiful," Elon replied. "All these moving parts, trying not to drift apart." There was a pause, then Mike added softly, "I think I needed to fall to know how to guide others back up." Elon nodded. "You're not guiding. You're launching." They clinked cans together. The envelope sat unopened on Mike's desk for a full day. Embossed with the logo of the Global Aerospace Forum, it had the weight of something formal, something ceremonial. But more than that, it carried risk. Not the kind measured in fuel margins or tensile stress, but the deeper kind, exposure. Elon had dropped it off personally. "You don't have to say yes," he'd said. "But I think it's time they heard from someone who's actually touched the fire." Mike didn't answer at the time. He just nodded, then stared at the envelope like it might detonate. Now, standing alone in his room, he opened it. Inside was an invitation. Not to attend, to speak. Keynote guest. Saturday evening. Closed industry leadership session. Mike sat back slowly in his chair. Keynote. Him. For most of his life, Mike had been the man outside the room. And now he was being asked to stand at the podium, not to apologize, not to defend, but to speak. That terrified him more than any rocket failure ever had. The night arrived with electric quiet. The venue was discreet, a minimalist auditorium outside Austin, filled not with press, but with aerospace executives, engineers, policy leaders, and a handful of classified dignitaries who'd seen more moonshots than most nations had flags. No cameras, no recordings, just eyes. Hundreds of them. Mike stood backstage, clutching a single sheet of paper he wouldn't end up reading from. He wore a borrowed blazer over his usual threadbare shirt. The sleeves were too long. His shoes were a last-minute gift from Kira, who insisted flip-flops would not survive the carpet. Elon appeared beside him, cool as always. "You don't have to be perfect," he said. "You just have to be honest." Mike gave a nervous laugh. "I've been many things. Polished isn't one of them." "That's why they'll listen." The coordinator waved. It was time. The room fell silent as Mike stepped into the light. He squinted at first. The spotlight was unforgiving. But as his eyes adjusted, he saw them, a sea of suits, lanyards, crossed arms, and cautious curiosity. He stepped up to the podium, cleared his throat, and then, without looking at the page in his hand, he began. "I never wanted to be remembered," he said. "I just didn't want to be forgotten for the wrong reasons." The room didn't stir. It listened. "My name is Michael Allen Sanderson. Some of you knew me. Most of you didn't. But many of you sat in boardrooms where my name was once whispered. As a liability. As a footnote. Or worse, as a ghost." A few heads turned. One man in the second row lowered his chin, uncomfortable. "I worked on a project called Prometheus. I filed a report no one wanted to read. Then 3 engineers died, and I disappeared." His voice didn't waver. It deepened. "I spent years thinking I'd failed them, that my voice hadn't been enough. But I've come to understand something since then. Silence isn't always chosen. Sometimes it's assigned." A sharp inhale from somewhere near the back. "We've built engines that can escape gravity, that can survive re-entry, that can burn hotter than anything on Earth. But we still haven't figured out how to hold ourselves accountable. We reward speed. we punish pause. And when someone says, "This might not be safe," we call them uncooperative. He let that sit, then continued, "I'm not here to accuse. I'm here because someone gave me a second chance. Elon Musk gave me a whiteboard and a reason to write again. His team gave me ears. And slowly the world gave me space to exist, not as a relic, but as a mentor." He looked across the room, his gaze settling not on the front rows, but the younger faces near the back. If you are an intern or a junior engineer or the person in the meeting who speaks second because you're afraid to speak first, this is for you. Do not let your fear of being dismissed keep you from saying what matters. Because one voice, one true voice, can save a rocket or a life. He paused. Then he said more quietly, "And if you are someone in power, please remember, the strongest force in aerospace isn't thrust. It's humility." The room went still, and then the applause began, tentative at first, then rising, rolling, a standing ovation that washed across the room like thunder refracted through steel. In the back corner of the room, Victor Harlan watched. He didn't clap. He didn't move. He simply stood with his arms folded, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on a man who had just taken back what Victor had worked so long to bury. Clarice leaned over and whispered, "It's over." Victor didn't answer, because he knew she was right. It wasn't the report, or the media, or the Senate hearings that would come. It was this, a barefoot man in a too-long blazer, standing in front of the people who had once erased him, and being believed. Victor turned and walked out without a word. After the event, Elon found Mike standing outside under the stars, tie half undone, a beer in hand, looking up at the dark sky like it owed him nothing and everything. "You crushed it," Elon said. Mike laughed. "I think my knees are still vibrating." "You're allowed to shake. Even rockets do." They stood together, watching the stars flicker, in silence. Then Elon asked, "How do you feel?" Mike took a breath, like the wind just started blowing upward. Elon looked at him. "What does that mean?" Mike smiled faintly. "It means maybe now, when I fall asleep, I won't dream of being forgotten." The memo from Novodyne's board was as cold as the vacuum their rockets failed to reach. Effective immediately, Victor Harlan is placed on indefinite leave pending the outcome of a federal investigation into the concealment of classified engineering data related to Project Prometheus. The statement was carefully worded, polished, designed to deflect. But everyone in the industry knew this wasn't a suspension. It was an ejection. The empire Victor built, with its glass walls, shadow contracts, and airtight NDAs, had finally cracked under the one pressure it couldn't quantify: truth. Within 72 hours, 12 engineers from Novodyne submitted their resignations. 5 went dark. 7 reappeared quietly at SpaceX, sitting down in Halcyon's bullpen with the hesitant curiosity of astronauts stepping out of an airlock. None of them asked for job titles. They only wanted to build again, honestly. Elon greeted them all personally. "Leave your past at the door," he told them. "Bring only your questions." Mike watched the shift from a quiet distance. He wasn't suspicious, just cautious. He knew what it felt like to carry the weight of silence for too long, and how disorienting freedom could be once it arrived. He offered no lectures, just time. One afternoon, while showing a new recruit how to calibrate reaction wheel mock-up, Mike paused mid-sentence. The engineer, a man in his late 30s named Darius, looked up. "Everything okay?" Mike nodded, then said, "You ever feel like your hands remember something your mind hasn't caught up to yet?" Darius smiled. "Only every day." They shared a knowing laugh, 2 men learning to trust themselves again. Later that week, Elon found Mike sitting beneath the old mesquite tree near the test pad, watching Halcyon, 2 being wheeled into the integration bay. The midday sun cast long shadows across the gravel. "You're becoming a fixture out here," Elon said. "I like watching things that rise," Mike replied. Elon sat beside him. He waited for a moment, then cleared his throat in a way that wasn't casual. "I have something to ask you." Mike gave him a sidelong look. "I'm not marrying you." "Not yet," Elon smirked. Then he added more seriously, "We want to name the next long-range booster after you." the first of the new generation. It would mean something. Mike turned away, not an offense in thought. Then slowly he said, "I appreciate it, truly, but I have to say no." Elon blinked. "Why?" "Because I'm not a monument, Elon. I'm not a myth. I'm a man who almost wasn't." He leaned forward, arms on his knees. "I spent 10 years being no one. And when I came back, it wasn't because someone remembered my name. It was because someone noticed my work." Elon listened, expression soft. Mike continued, "Name the rocket after the wind, after a sound, after something invisible that moves things. But not after me." "You're part of the movement," Elon said. "I was the silence before it." They sat in that quiet for a moment. Then Mike added, almost like a confession, "I don't want to be a name. I want to be a push. A moment. The kind that makes someone smarter than me take a risk I didn't." Elon nodded. "Then you already are." By the end of the month, the redesigns Mike helped shape had been fully integrated into Halcyon 2's framework. The team ran test after test. The numbers didn't just hold, they sang. The engine's harmonics were smoother, fuel efficiency higher, margin for error smaller. It was the kind of progress that couldn't be explained by one person alone. And that was the point. Mike didn't want credit. He wanted continuity. Meanwhile, Victor Harlan sat in a corner office he no longer controlled, facing a wall of subpoenas and silence. The phones didn't ring. The press didn't chase him. His name didn't trend. He had become exactly what he once feared, forgettable. At night, he watched reruns of launch footage, hands twitching as boosters rose with the grace of promises he no longer had a part in. And in his dreams, the sound of ignition was always followed by a single phrase. He tried to erase a voice that wouldn't die. Back in Boca Chica, a new plaque was quietly installed near the Halcyon Labs. It wasn't big. It didn't even carry a name. It simply read, "A push is all it takes." Some believed Elon wrote it. Others said it was Kira. Mike never said anything. But when he passed it on his morning walks, he smiled and tapped it once, like a launch button. One evening, after a particularly long session of open candé with interns, Mike found himself sitting again with Elon on the back steps of the lab. They were watching the orange-purple sky swallow the last of the day. The air was dry, electric. "You know what I used to fear more than failure?" Mike asked. Elon shook his head. "Obscurity," Mike said. "I thought being unknown meant being worthless. Now, I think obscurity is where most real work begins." Elon raised his can of mate. "To the unknown, then." Mike clinked it with his coffee thermos. "And to those who don't need to be remembered, just heard." They sat there as the stars started blinking into view. And neither of them said anything for a long time. Because sometimes the greatest legacy is a silence that finally knows peace. The request seemed simple. Elon had asked his legal team to begin the onboarding process. Mike Smith, honorary lead advisor to Project Halcyon, was due a formal title, an official badge, and, at long last, a public name. "Get him a contract," Elon said. "Make it real." But real, it turned out, wasn't something they could pin down. No social security number, no government ID, no medical records, no tax filings, not even a birth certificate. At first, they assumed a clerical error, then a glitch, then maybe a bureaucratic oversight from years Mike spent off-grid. But when the HR director called Elon at 3 a.m. and whispered, "We've run every database we have access to, and Mike Smith doesn't exist. Not just now, not ever." The world tilted. Elon didn't panic. Not immediately. He called Kira, then Lauren from legal, then one of the cybersecurity leads. "Start from the beginning," he told them. "Follow every breadcrumb." They pulled old surveillance tapes, interview archives, audio logs. Every document with Mike's handwriting was reviewed, from napkin sketches to Halcyon design notes. And that's when the second revelation hit. The handwriting wasn't consistent. Slight differences. Angle, pressure, loops in the GS. Even the way he drew rocket schematics had subtle variations over time. It wasn't a style change. It was more than one person. 3 days later, a declassified file from an old engineering whistleblower forum gave them their first real clue. A thread dated from 2007, buried under layers of dead hyperlinks and abandoned user accounts. The subject line read, "Smith isn't one man. It's a promise." Inside were anonymous confessions, engineers, test analysts, simulation modelers. All claimed to have used the alias Mike Smith at different points in time while leaking data, resisting unsafe launches, or sharing warnings within the aerospace underground. They weren't conspirators. They were outcasts. A resistance, not against companies, but against the silence that let bad science win. And the man Elon had known, he was one of them. Or many. Or none. The house was empty. No sign of struggle. No signs of departure. The notebook was gone. The clothes. The sketches. The old flip-flops. Even the plaque Elon had once given him. All that remained was a sealed envelope on the desk. Elon opened it with shaking fingers. Inside was a single page. Handwritten. Slanted script. Black ink. "Elon, thank you for giving a ghost a voice. I don't know if I was ever just one person. Maybe I was the last. Maybe I was the first. Maybe I was just the echo that stayed long enough to teach others how to listen. Truth doesn't need a name. It only needs a direction. Maybe I was never supposed to stay. Maybe I never really did. Mike. P.S. Check the payload. Halcyon 3 launched the next morning. The sky was clear. The wind still. The crowd smaller than usual, but attentive. Elon stood at the observation deck, arms crossed, lips pressed tightly. The engines ignited. The ground shook. The rocket rose, clean, quiet, perfect. And inside the secondary payload bay, as the final access logs revealed hours before liftoff, was a metal plate bolted behind a camera module, engraved with a single sentence. For those who never had an address, but always had a direction. No signature, no initials, just the words. Kira stood beside Elon as the rocket disappeared into the morning blue. "He's gone," she said softly. Elon didn't reply. What was he? Elon exhaled. A vector. A what? A force. With no origin, no destination. Just influence. Something that alters trajectory. She nodded, eyes damp. "Do you think he'll come back?" "No," Elon said. "But someone like him will." Months passed. A new intern joined Halcyon. Quiet, sharp, carried a worn leather-bound sketchbook, and asked too many questions, the right kind. One day, he handed Kira a fuel mixture diagram that corrected a minor flaw no one else had caught. She looked at it. "This is advanced." The intern smiled awkwardly. "Sometimes I remember things I haven't learned yet." She stared at him. Something in his eyes, not the face, not the voice, felt familiar, like an old song reorchestrated. "What's your name?" she asked. He hesitated, then smiled. "Just call me Mike." Elon kept the letter framed on his wall, beside a mission patch from Prometheus, the one project that had nearly silenced everything. Now it was surrounded by blueprints from Halcyon and concept art for a new, unmanned deep space vehicle. No name yet. Only a call sign, M.S-infinity. He looked at it every night before he went home, not because he needed to remember, but because he needed to continue. Some legacies don't need faces. Some revolutions begin not with shouting, but with whispering the truth long enough that someone finally hears it. If this story stayed with you, tell me, where are you from? For everyone who's ever built without credit, spoken without applause, or tried to change the system without leaving their name behind, this one's for you. Where we're going, direction means more than destination.